Hey, Carl, how are you?
Hey, good, Nate. How are you doing?
Doing well.
I
I'm gonna
joined as a participant at first, so I got myself in the wrong line. But I think I got us now.
Good to see you. Yeah, we're gonna
Yeah,
kick things off in a couple minutes. We're gonna give about like a minute and a half more time for a few more people to join.
great.
Carl, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
All right, one more minute and then we'll get this started. Um, And by the way, for everyone who's already joined, as we go through this webinar, feel free to submit questions through the Zoom. They have a little Q&A feature, and we'll come back to all of those questions at the end of the webinar. All right, Carl, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right. So, hey everyone. It's nice to see you all. Well, I don't see you all, but I know that you see me. So it's nice to chat with everyone. I'm excited to do this webinar with Carl. We're going to do a webinar today on content ideation and strategy for developer tool companies. And I'm excited to do it. There's a lot to cover. We've got about 30 slides prepared. So we're going to run through those 30 slides. And then at the end, we'll have like a Q&A session. So if you have any questions as we're going through this webinar, feel free to drop them into the Zoom and we will attack them at the end. And just to kick things off, we thought it'd be good to give you a little bit of background on us. First off, my name's Nate. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Positional. We're building tools for content marketing and SEO teams. And I've been a content marketer building large SEO channels for most of the last 10 years. So I've built very large blogs in industries ranging from B to C consumer finance and then into developer tools. And I spent like most of the last 2 years building a really large Kubernetes blog called ContaignIQ, which we ultimately grew to about 200,000 readers per month, growing it to what I think was the largest Kubernetes blog on the internet over the course of about 14 months. And so building content for a developer audience is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last 2 years. And I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about some of the things that I've learned in terms of picking topics and the strategy we used at ContaignIQ.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And my name's Carl. Before starting Draft.dev, which is what I do now primarily, I was a CTO at a couple small startups here in Chicago. So got to be the first employee or second employee a couple times and see that whole run of things. On the side, I always wrote for myself, my personal blog, as well as for other companies that would reach out to me. And in 2020, when the pandemic hit, last startup I was with started to fall apart. And so I decided to go full-time doing writing. And pretty quickly that grew beyond just me. So we have now worked with over 150 clients. We've got a core team of around 10 or 12 people, and then several dozen freelancers and about 350 writers that work with us. All our writers at Draft.dev are software engineers. And so for things like ContaignIQ, it's the kind of writer you need to produce really good, high quality technical content. But of course, we have to merge that in with editorial work too. And so we've written thousands and thousands of blog posts and tutorials for clients. A really common issue that we see is clients coming to us with just random strings of ideas. I think, Nate, you actually had a really good way. You had a tweet, I think, about this recently I saw, where, it's the goal of this webinar is to help you avoid just random ideas and just pursuing whatever you think is of that day, and instead be a little more strategic about the ways you come up with topics for reaching engineers. So yeah, that's what we'll kind of talk about today. And Nate and I worked together when he was building ContaignIQ. We were one of the sources for content that he used. So the stuff that I'm going to share today is based on Nate's experience, but also of the 150 other clients that we work with. There's sort of a top tier of clients that are doing really good, consistent, high quality technical content. And what I'll try to do is distill a few of the strategies that they use to get that content. And it all starts with coming up with good ideas. Of course, you've got to produce good content. You have to get it in front of your audience. You have to promote it. But like, let's start with the foundation, which is let's just stop writing random things and start building things strategically towards a goal in mind. So I think we can kind of move to the next slide there, Nate. The first thing that's important to understand, just at a high level, is the marketing funnel in general. The reason I explain this, some of you may be marketers and may already know this like the back of your hand, so I don't want to talk down to you, but I've realized in working in developer content that a lot of people who are really more technical come into roles like developer relations or even heads of growth. And if you have an engineering background, you may not be familiar with this concept of a marketing funnel, but it's really important when it comes to content. And so just generally speaking, let's divide the funnel into 3 parts. Top is just, it means like we're building awareness for our brand. If you're a brand new company, you just need to like have people know you exist before you build those other parts of the funnel in most cases. In the middle of the funnel, we're looking for people who already maybe know you exist, but are evaluating different options for the solution. So they might be comparing you to competitors. They might be looking to make sure you have the features they want, et cetera. And then bottom of funnel content is usually they're right there about to close and they're just checking all the boxes, or maybe they've already closed and you're trying to get them to upgrade to a bigger account, or even refer a friend. And that's kind of the different levels of the funnel. And the reason these are important to know is that the content you write should be aimed strategically at different points in the funnel. And then the calls to action on that content are going to change depending on where in the funnel you're aiming. You also have to realize if you have no top of funnel, it's minimally valuable to create bottom of funnel content. So there's kind of a necessary order in most cases for content marketing. So that's kind of some quick background. Obviously, there's a ton more you could dig into in content marketing, so I'm not going to belabor the point because our main focus here are 4 strategies that we've identified as being really specifically good in developer marketing. Keyword research, Nate's going to go into a lot of detail on that because that's his area of expertise. When he worked with us at Draft.dev, he came to us every month with a big list of keywords and topics based on those keywords to attack. So I know he knows how to do that really well. We will then talk as well about how to come up with things based on collateral that will help sales teams or customer support teams, community input, and then the sort of higher level thought leadership type stuff, which I call worldview type content. So I'll let Nate get started with the first section here on keyword research.
Yeah, like Karl mentioned, we're going to go into 4 different types of content that you want to create. And I think like an important place to start is by doing a process known as keyword research. At ContentIQ, we spent a lot of time thinking about the different questions and keywords people were asking in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And for me, keyword research is the process of identifying those questions, those topics that people are asking about or want to learn about. And then when someone has a question, they typically go to Google, at least I do, when I'm looking to get an answer to that question. And so keyword research is the process of figuring out what questions people have and then what keywords are associated with those questions. And then getting the data you need to decide, like, is this a piece of content I want to write about? So data like how often are people searching that question or keyword? What's the difficulty of that keyword or question? So how hard it would be for you to rank in search for that question. And so as I'm building a content strategy, usually like the first thing I'll do is I'll build an editorial with keywords or questions that people are asking about my product or my industry. And I'll show you an example of that. So at ContentIQ, like I mentioned, we created a lot of content. Almost every piece of content we created was targeted to some specific keyword or question someone had in our industry. And so, for example, like Kubernetes events, that's a keyword in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And we created a piece of content, like a mega guide, all about Kubernetes events. So telling you what they were, the different types of events, how to debug them. And so when someone went to Google and typed in Kubernetes events, we showed up first. And I often get asked, like, how do I show up at the top of search results? Because it's one thing to like find the right keywords, pick good keywords and good questions, and then create those pieces of content. But how do I show up first? And it's actually not too complex. At least the inputs aren't overly complex. People tend to make SEO or content marketing more difficult than it needs to be. To rank well in Google for the questions or keywords that you care about, you really need to do that keyword research. So first things first, picking like 30 or 40 or 50 different keywords that you want to attack. You then need to create fantastic content. And like Karl mentioned, we worked with Draft for well over 100 pieces of content on our website. You need to ensure, like from a technical perspective, that you're doing everything right. So things like internally linking, having a sitemap, making your website fast, and then you can build some backlinks to your website. And then you need to repeat. Content marketing, whether you're creating content intended for search engines or other types of content, it's a long-term game and long-term strategy, but it also has long-term value. And so the companies that I see do content marketing the best are companies that can repeat and build processes around doing keyword research, creating this fantastic content, and also technical SEO. And as far as like getting the data you need to decide if like this is a good keyword you want to go after, there are many different tools for this. We have a tool at Positional for keyword research, but there are plenty of others like Ahrefs and SEMrush and many other tools that I'm sure you're using or have used before. But this is typically where I would start. So I would kind of do some iteration on my end, figure out what questions people have, and then I would take those questions and go to a tool like Positional or Ahrefs and search for those questions or those keywords and get the data. So that data is how many times is each keyword being searched each month? How difficult will it be for my article to show up on the first page? And then after I've started with like a single keyword or a set of like keywords that I've identified, I would then look to expand to like related keywords. So our tool and many of the other tools will give you a whole bunch of other related ideas. So if you start with a broad term like Kubernetes, you'll then find a whole bunch of related keywords like Kubernetes tutorial, Kubernetes ingress, Kubernetes cluster, what is Kubernetes used for, Kubernetes security. These were all keywords that we identified as interesting to our users at ContainerIQ. And we were able to get the data, search volume, and competition to be able to prioritize them and figure out which ones we wanted to write first. And I think from an SEO standpoint, and at ContainerIQ, we drove like 190,000 out of the 200,000 visitors per month to our blog from organic search. So we were very concerned about how well we ranked in search engines. And from an SEO standpoint, I think it's really important to cover all of the topics or all of the keywords in your category. For some businesses or some companies, that might be 50 keywords. For other companies, that might be 500 keywords. And from Google's perspective, to rank the best, you truly need to cover every keyword or question someone has in your space. And so at ContainerIQ, we created about 225 articles. And for us, that was like enough to say that, okay, we covered our baseline. Like we covered at least 90% of what we thought the questions people were asking about Kubernetes. And that's important because it helps to show Google that you are like the topical relevant source. You'll often hear words like topical authority. That just means showing Google that like your website is about this and your website is a good source of information about Kubernetes in our case, for example. And so in the beginning, you want to pick a mix of broad terms, long tail keywords, as well as low and high value topics. What is a long tail keyword? A long tail keyword is just like a more specific type of keyword. So maybe like a very specific issue someone's having with their Kubernetes cluster. Whereas like a broad or a head term, that might be a keyword like what is Kubernetes? And so you want to cover both like very specific topics and keywords, as well as like broader topics and keywords within your category. And the keywords will align to different stages of the funnel. I know Karl mentioned the different stages of the funnel. And for us at ContainerIQ, we kind of had 4 different types of keywords that we would go after. So we would go after evergreen pieces of content and evergreen keywords. For example, like what is a Kubernetes cluster? That's probably like very high in the funnel. Like that person might be just starting their journey into Kubernetes or trying to learn about it for the first time. We did a lot of how-to guides, for example, like how to debug a Kubernetes crash loop backoff event and tutorials. So when someone was actually in the weeds trying to find a solution to the problem they're having right now, we created pieces of content to help them do that. We also then covered many lower or ready to buy type keywords as well. So for example, like best Kubernetes monitoring tools, they were actively looking for a tool set for Kubernetes monitoring. So we wanted to introduce ourselves to them at that point in time. And then we also did a lot of like tool versus tool content. And I think this will be a good hack for a lot of the companies on this call. This is one of my favorite suggestions to make. And I think one of the areas where companies miss out on a lot of really high intent bottom of the funnel keywords is to do tool versus tool comparison articles. And these aren't your tool versus another tool. These are two other tools versus themselves. So for example, like Datadog versus New Relic. No one would have ever heard of our company ContaineIQ before, so they weren't searching Datadog versus ContaineIQ, but people knew about New Relic. So they were searching for Datadog versus New Relic or Datadog versus Grafana, and then we were using these keywords as a way to then insert ourselves into the conversation as like a third tool that they might want to consider too. And so we had like 4 very distinct kind of buckets of keywords that we would go after, all within that topic of Kubernetes. And prioritizing topics can be difficult. If you're just starting this journey, you might spend an hour and come up with like 200 different ideas. But I think you can use like keyword difficulty. That's like a difficulty score that like our tool and many of the other tools will suggest to you to get a sense of like how long or how hard it would take for your website to rank on the first page for the keyword you care about. And so if you're just starting this process, you typically want to go after like those lower difficulty type keywords, maybe with difficulties of like 20 or 30 or 40, because those are going to be the keywords that you can rank on the first page with faster and drive traffic to your site back faster. And from an SEO standpoint, like you might not want to go after very low volume search terms. I think if something is very closely related to your business or product and it's getting 50 searches a month, then like, let's write about it. But if it's not that closely related, then I think you need to make the judgment call on, is this actually an article you want to write? And a big like mistake that I'll see startups make, especially in dev tools, is that they'll write about topics that no one is actually searching for. So there is like no primary keyword. And so at least from Google's perspective as a distribution channel, you have to make the call on, well, if no one's searching for it, do I actually want to write that article or not? And so typically I would use like a baseline of like 100 searches per month to make the decision to write that piece of content. And then I often get asked, like, how do I create fantastic content? At least fantastic content for me from the perspective of like a search engine would be to write content that like very clearly answers the question or keyword that's being asked. So if you'd asked me like 7 or 8 years ago, I would have said, you know what, we should write like 5,000 word mega guides and cover like 10 or 15 different keywords in each one. But long gone are those days. And 2023, the best approach is for every single keyword or question, have a very specific direct article for that keyword. It means you're going to have to write more content or more articles, but those are going to be the articles that actually perform the best in search. And so creating fantastic keyword-based content means you're being direct, you're being helpful, you're being actionable, and you're being in-depth. At ContaineIQ, most of the articles we wrote were between 1,000 and 2,500 words. They were not 300 words and they were not 3,500 words. A big mistake that I'll see like startups make is they'll write like 50, 300 word articles. And like, that's a lot of articles, but those articles are not very helpful. And from Google's perspective, they might be seen as like thin content. And so you're much better off writing a smaller number of articles, but each article being of higher quality, being in depth, being actually helpful for that reader or that person who's asking that question. But you probably don't want to go past like 3,000 or 4,000 words for a single post. That's just too long in 2023, at least in my experience. And it's kind of boilerplate, but you want to make that content easy to read, free of spelling and grammatical mistakes. You want to source appropriately. And I think that's really all you need to do to create a fantastic article. And then one thing I do want to mention before I hand it off to Karl, and this is another mistake that I see a lot of startups make, especially in dev tools, is the problem of keyword cannibalization. What is keyword cannibalization? Keyword cannibalization just means that you've written like 2 or 3 or 4 articles on the exact same primary keyword. When we built our blog at ContaineIQ, every one of those 225 articles we created was targeted at one very specific, unique keyword. A big mistake that I'll see companies and dev tools make is they'll write like the same article with the same primary keyword like 4 or 5 times over, thinking like that will help them rank better in search. When that's not actually true. It actually will have a negative impact. Keyword cannibalization just means that you're confusing Google, like which article from your website they should actually rank and search for the keyword you care about. And I don't know if CubeVS is on this call. I hope that they're not. But before the call, I went and searched for like Kubernetes monitoring tools. And I saw CubeVS was on the third page with these two different articles stacked against each other. One was top 5 Kubernetes monitoring tools. The second was top 5 Kubernetes monitoring tools part 2. So this is a very clear cannibalization issue. Google is basically confused on which one of these posts they should rank highly in search. And when you confuse Google, that usually means lower rankings. And both of these posts are not ranking as well as they should. So what I would suggest CubeVS do is merge these into a single article and then 301 redirect the old URL into the now new primary URL. So long story short, when you're creating your content, don't write the same article 4 times for the same primary keyword. That was a lot on keyword research, and I promise this whole call is not going to be about SEO, but I will hand it off to Karl now to go into the next 3 strategies you should be thinking about for content.
Yeah, and I will say that I think SEO is a really, really important differentiator and long-term asset for brands, and that's why we thought it was worth putting a little more time into it, especially because it's often misunderstood and misdone, done poorly in developer tools. But when you think about the top companies in developer tools, especially the bottoms-up companies, things like DigitalOcean, Cloudflare, they're all building a ton of content based on keyword research and SEO. It's not accidental that they're ranking for every term in their space. So it's really important. Anyway, okay, so the next one we'll talk about is developer collateral. So SEO and getting traffic from Google makes a ton of sense when you're trying to build awareness, get the top of the funnel built. But what if you have users, let's say they're free users who are thinking about upgrading, or you want to get upgraded? Or what if you have a sales cycle where you're having phone calls with CIOs who then bring the tool into their engineers to review and assess and make sure it works well? Well, one kind of content that's really helpful for that is what I would call developer collateral. This could be sales or support collateral, but essentially, and you can flip to the next slide there, Nate. I don't think I lost you yet. Yeah, so this is we worked with CodeCov for a couple of years early on. Before they were sold at some point. So when we started working with them, they had documentation, right? Everybody's got to have documentation. That's table stakes. And it's absolutely helpful. But documentation doesn't really show you what all you can build. It's a very static kind of bland way to present your features. It doesn't show you why you'd use a feature. It just shows you how to use the feature, right? So if you go to the next slide there, Nate, what we did for them was wrote a bunch of content that showed not only how to use this particular tool, CodeCov, which is a code coverage measurement tool, but also how to use it for different specific use cases. So as you might imagine with CodeCov, they're integrating with a language or framework, in this case, Python, and a CI and CD platform, in this case, GitHub Actions. And any number of combinations could happen. You could have Jenkins and iOS. You could have Python and GitHub Actions. You could have Python and CodeShip. There's infinite combinations, right? Because there's so many tools and languages they had to integrate with. But what they did is they went through their user base and saw what are the most popular languages, most popular CI/CD platforms. Let's build an article that shows people we are usable with these tools. And then anytime a support question comes up, hey, I'm running a Python thing, I'm having an issue. Great, here's a article that shows you exactly how to do it in your tool set. And it shows screenshots, it shows code samples, it has a GitHub repo, super valuable asset for the bottom of the funnel. This stuff is not likely to attract brand new users who have never heard of CodeCov unless they're already kind of aware that CodeCov is maybe what they're looking for, and they're just making sure it checks the boxes, right? So again, this is not awareness building content, much more down towards the actually closing a deal or getting a paid customer, but it's super important. And in a dev tool company, you're almost always going to start building this kind of content at some point. It's a question of how quickly and how much of it you want to do. All right, so the next strategy we will talk about is community input. And this is, I'll say it's similar-ish to keyword research, but a little less certain and a little more sticking your finger in the air and measuring the wind, which is very imprecise, but it is still a useful and valuable way to come up with topic ideas, especially if you're in a sort of an area that doesn't have keyword volume yet. One of the downsides to keyword research is that it only works on past data. So all the tools use past search volume estimates from Google searches and Bing searches to estimate how much volume of search there will be in the future, which is great when you're talking about established things like Kubernetes. It's been around long enough that there's plenty of search volume, plenty of things you can look for. But if you're talking about something super nascent, let's say like an NFT project, there may not be keyword research in your space, or like, I don't know, cross-chain compatibility, right? Like, I don't know how many people are searching for that, but it's probably very low and probably not really picked up well by the tools yet because it's such a niche thing. Now, that said, if you believe strongly that's going to get more important over time, then it's absolutely worth writing content on that. But you have to have some method of coming up with ideas. So community research is or community input is what we would recommend in this case. So for this, what we'll often see people do is go to Stack Overflow. Let's look at the newest trending questions in our space and see if there are any questions out there we could build a whole piece of content around. Obviously, Stack Overflow ranks highly in Google for a ton of things, as developers all know, but it's good to be in that mix, and it might work through search. It might also be something you can promote to communities like your Slack groups, Reddit groups, et cetera, because if something's getting talked about a lot and asked a lot on Stack Overflow, it's likely worth more than just the 300 or 500 words that they put on Stack Overflow. Another method to do this, or another way we've seen this done, we worked with a company called BackHub, and actually they got bought by Rewind, so there's some little bit of branding change there. But with BackHub, what they wanted was to go through Stack Overflow and look for all the biggest questions and challenges surrounding Bitbucket, GitHub, and GitLab. And the idea was, let's write content that shows how to use our tool, but also how to answer those questions on all these different platforms, right? So they're a backup platform for GitHub and Bitbucket. And this is a super helpful way to come up with ideas that there's some conversations out there. There were already questions about, how do I back up my Bitbucket, account? How do I back up a repository in Bitbucket, et cetera? So we knew there was some interest, even though there wasn't as much search volume as we would like to see. Again, it's less precise, but it can be really good if you do this in a very direct way, and maybe you have an audience already that you can engage and push this content out to. All right, so the last one we'll talk about is worldview or thought leadership content. I don't use the term thought leadership usually to describe this, because that term gets kind of thrown around for a lot of different things. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. So I like just calling it worldview type content. And the idea with worldview type content is you're trying to show why your point of view or your product or your solution is super unique to the world. This is not high volume content. You can't produce. I actually had a client or prospective client come to me and say, we want to get really cutting edge, persuasive, really technically deep pieces on Hacker News and get them hit the front page every week. And I was like, that's not possible. It's just not going to happen. If anybody tells you they can, pay them whatever they can if they can actually do it, but be really skeptical, because that audience is discerning, and that kind of content is just inherently rare. It takes a level of experience and perspective that likely only your founders or really early engineers and people who are super involved in the product are going to have. So what I recommend on this typically is, yes, you should do it. You won't do it in high volume, but you should absolutely do some of it. You should have your founders write blog posts every now and then. You should have them talk about why we built this product, how we built it, the internals, the cool little things you've solved along the way. But don't expect that to be your bread and butter content that you actually drive long-term sustainable growth from. It's nice for spikes. It'll get passed around on Hacker News or Reddit every now and then. It'll get picked up in newsletters every now and then. It'll help you build backlinks, which is absolutely critical in the long run, but it's not the kind of thing you can really build a whole content workflow off of alone. I think one company that does a really good job of this kind of content is Fly.io, and they just do a fantastic job of having several people on the team who can write super in-depth. And this is a 23-minute read about the difference between, I can't think, it was 32-bit IP addresses or whatever. I don't remember, but I remember reading this and being like, this is such a good, unique piece. No one else could write this. They're in a really unique spot to write it. They know all about the space. They know the history of the space. Super cool. It's like reading a Wikipedia article or beyond. You're just but also just kind of more flavorful. So great content, but there's no way you could put a piece like this out every 2 days. And so you're not going to build that same steady flow of increasing traffic with it. You're going to hit spikes when one of these goes viral, and that's kind of all you get. So use these, but kind of with the asterisks. Now, the obvious next question that comes up, and Nate and I both always like face this, and it's like there's no right answer or wrong answer here, but I do think it's important to know the trade-offs. So how do you pick which topics or which strategies you want to use? Are you going to go all keyword research? Are you going to go all thought leadership worldview and just publish once a month? Are you going to go with some kind of blend of this? And the answer is really, it depends a lot on your product and your goals. But here, what I would say is typically a mix is going to be good. Where keyword research tends to do best is when you want long-term, highly predictable results at the top and middle of your funnel. Keyword research, and Nate can sort of weigh in on that, but that's typically where we see the most success. You do have to reach high volume if you're going to do keyword research over time. A lot of people think, well, if I just write 12 articles and I cover the 12 most important keywords, then I can be done with it. As Nate pointed out, you need all the supporting content to build those core 12 articles up in rankings. It's not that simple, unfortunately, because you're competing with really big brands that know how to do this really well. So unfortunately, it's not a low volume game, but it still needs to be high quality. So keyword research is great because it's highly predictable, but it does take time to build up and a fair bit of budget to actually get going, because you are going to be writing tens and hundreds of articles a year if you really want to rank. Building the best Kubernetes blog like Nate did is ambitious, and also takes really, really direct focus on that. Now, that said, a lot of companies can start to do some keyword research while also filling in the gaps with some other types of content, like that worldview content, which can be great for building some backlinks early on. It shows, here's how we built this product, here's why it's cool. You get that stuff on Hacker News occasionally, and it can do well. And it's also good to point to when you're telling your story. As founders, we all know the importance of telling our story to investors, to early team members, to early customers, because ultimately they're all buying from people. They're all interacting with you. A community input is, I would say, less predictable than keyword research. And so I typically, I don't want to say I always recommend you don't do it, but I think you have to be very specific about why you're doing it and have a really good intent as to like why these topics make sense for you, and maybe ways you can reuse them, or also have them be keyword driven as well as community driven. There's kind of a blend there that can happen. And then collateral, that bottom of funnel content, is super important, especially once you have users. And even if you've only got like your first 100 users, but they're asking the same 5 questions over and over again, that's a great hint that you should be building some of that developer collateral that helps them get in the mix and actually use your product to the best of their abilities. And Nate, I'm going to let you chime in here too. Like, how do you think about choosing between keyword research and some of these other methods, or maybe there's other things that we haven't covered here?
Yeah, I totally agree that like keyword research, it's a volume game. But I also agree that it's highly predictable. Like if you do keyword research, you pick the right topics, you create good content, like it will work. And like Karl said, it does take more than just 12 articles. Like I mentioned, I think kind of covering the entire spectrum of topics is really important, because it helps show like Google that like your website, in our case, is like the best source of information on Kubernetes. But I think as you're creating other types of content as well, like developer collateral or your worldview, thought leadership pieces, I still think it's important to like think about keywords in those pieces of content as well. Because like ideally, like you can hit a home run on Hacker News with the thought leadership piece, but you can also rank it at first for that keyword or a related keyword that someone might be searching for. So regardless of the type of content you're creating, I think it still makes sense to spend like 5, 10, 15 minutes to figure out, okay, like, is there a keyword I can attach this piece of content to, even though that's not the primary focus? And I like to think about like, the thought leadership pieces as like hitting home runs. Like we'll do like one of them a quarter, or we'll do one every 2 months. And like, it might be a home run. We're going to like swing for the fences on this one. And if it hits, like, that's fantastic. A lot more users, a lot more traffic right away. Whereas like keyword research based content, creating content for SEO, that's like, that's like hitting bunts or singles over and over again. Like we can hit a lot of singles,
Yep.
but it's harder to hit home runs.
Yeah.
But my batting average is going to be a lot higher over the long term if I hit a lot of singles versus trying to swing for the fences each time. But like Karl said, the thought leadership pieces are very difficult to create. Our company Contain IQ would have at least 2 or 3 members of our team working together on every thought leadership piece. So we would bring in members of the engineering team who had like very specialized knowledge in this very specific, very difficult topic. And so with the thought leadership pieces, it does definitely become a team effort. Whereas with like keyword-based content or developer collateral, you could often use like a freelancer or an agency, or kind of have a single person on your team creating that content.
Yeah.
How
I actually had I had a couple quick questions to follow up on the keyword thing, and then we get to the audience questions too, because I wanted to get your opinion on these, Nate. We haven't talked about these specific topics, but so how long do you see it typically taking results, or like how long does it usually take to start seeing results when you do a keyword research-based approach? And I get this question a ton from clients. I have an answer of what I see, and it obviously there's an asterisk on every answer, but I would love to hear what you say on that.
Yeah, I think if you're serious about the channel, like serious in building like an organic search strategy through keyword-based content, I always recommend to startups or companies to commit to 1 post a week. And if you do 1 post a week, like you'll have 52 like highly targeted pieces of content in a year from now. And I think you'll be really happy. If you can't do 1 article a week, I think every other week is good too. But like a big mistake I'll see startups make is they'll publish like 4 of these and then forget about it for 5 months and then be like, why didn't it drive any traffic? Why aren't they ranking? Like the key is like once a week, once every other week, because usually there's a portfolio of content to build. Like it might be 50 articles, it might be 200 articles, but the sooner you get started on it, the better. And like Karl said, it does become like a really core asset to the business. If you get acquired or, over the long term, you're looking to lower your customer acquisition costs by doing all of this like upfront work and building, it becomes like an annuity, like it's going to pay traffic and dividends kind of forever on into the future without you having to worry about it again. But as far as how long it took us at Contain IQ, we went like 0 to 100. So we published like 220 articles in about 14 months. So that averages out to about 3.5 pieces of content per week, which I would not recommend doing. It was quite the project for us. But for us, it took us about 3 months to get to about 10,000 visitors per month from organic search coming to our site. It took us about 6 months to get to 50,000 visitors per month. And then at 12 months, we were at about 150,000. And then at 14 months, we were at about 200,000. And what you'll find is that the organic search channel scales exponentially, not linearly. So like as you create new content, all of the other content you've created will also benefit from that new content as well as you're building that relevance, that authority in the space. And so for us at like Contain IQ, like by the time we got to 200 articles, like Google trusted us as like a good source of info on Kubernetes. And so if we were to publish article number 201, like it would probably hit the first page of Google search results that same day. And so you'll find that like the first, 10,000 visitors per month is the hardest, but it's actually a lot easier to go from 10,000 to 50,000 than it is to go from 0 to 10,000.
Sorry, my dog barking in the background, had to close the door. Okay, another question I get a lot is, what if you're trying to create a category? And that's a really hot thing in startups. Like, we want to stand out as a business. We don't want to be compared to the existing competitors, or I've even heard from some startups, we just don't have competitors. I always am skeptical of that in general, but what do you say to that? Like, if you're trying to create a category and you're trying to build your own, keywords that don't exist, how do you approach keyword driven content, or just maybe content in general?
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, for those industries where it's very nascent, and there just isn't a whole lot of data to like suggest what the keywords are, it's very difficult. And so in those cases, you have to like listen to your customers or listen to your community to like make a guess at like what are those questions they have, and then make the bet that more people are going to search for those questions into the future. And what I will say though is, if you do make that bet and it turns out to be a correct one, like, so say you create a piece of content around a theoretical keyword that people are going to be searching a lot more into the future. If you're kind of first on the scene, and you have like that first article that's ranking for that keyword today, even if not a whole lot of people are searching for it, you're going to get like some built-in like long-term kind of benefit of the doubt from Google. Like Google will see that, okay, you were like the first one on the scene. And so your piece of content is just naturally going to rank better for that keyword as it becomes more popular and more difficult. So if you can get a jump start on these keywords that not a lot of people are focusing on, or maybe have low volume today, but will have high volume into the future, I do think it makes sense to take that bet today if you have the resources. But in categories where you're trying to create a new product and, you know, you're trying to invent new terms that people haven't used before, I think the other three strategies that you highlighted, Karl, are probably where I would start before keyword research.
Yeah, I've seen a couple cases of this. DBT did a really good job becoming the space for analytics engineering. Like they made up the term. Well, I don't know if they made it up, but they really early latched onto that term and have kind of owned it. They now are kind of the place to go for analytics engineering. And that's interesting case of, like you're saying, like latching onto a keyword early before it had any volume, and now it's like something people talk about. Similarly, though, I would say that what we've seen with clients who are building a category is they talk about in their keyword research, look up what are the things we want to replace. So for example, we've worked with a company called Earthly.dev for a long time. Really early on, they went into keywords hard, and they're kind of a replacement for Docker files and make files, which is they're not a drop-in exact replacement, but that's sort of what they're trying to upset, right? And so for them, we want to rank for everything Docker file and everything make file, as well as all the related topics around those. And all we have is like, once we build that traffic and we've got, and they're now in the space where you guys were of like Contain IQ of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of monthly visitors. Now all we need to do is drop a call to action or drop a link. Hey, and Earthly also exists if you ever are looking for an alternative to this old school way of doing things. And it's a super straightforward strategy. A lot of people are afraid to do it because they're afraid it's going to call attention to their competitors, like their old school competitors. It's going to make them look better. But I would just argue, if your product really is moving the needle forward in a big way, you still want to capture that traffic from people who are looking for the old solutions. But anyway, so
Karl, I should have said that. That's a great idea. Yeah. Latching on your answer to your own question was a much better answer than my answer to your question.
My question was a little loaded, so
you knew the answer and I didn't, but it's a good answer. Yeah, I think latching on to the other ways of doing things that do have search volume is a great strategy. So for example, I talked to a company that's like looking to migrate companies off of Heroku, and for them, like covering the spectrum of content in Heroku is interesting. And then kind of pairing their value prop and their CTA around that Heroku based content works. So yeah, I definitely agree that latching on to the alternatives and then positioning your brand and your call to actions against it is a good strategy.
You want to do some audience questions? We've got a bunch that came in the Q&A, so we can start there.
I'll do this first, these first two. So the first one is on, actually I'll start and then I'll let you kind of finish it out. Sure. And Karl, can you see the Q&A, by the way?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So I know I mentioned creating fantastic content and like, what does it mean? I will start with this, but then I'll let Karl take it from here. So fantastic content, like I said, is direct, helpful, actionable, very specific to that keyword that someone's interested in. But for us at Contain IQ, like all of our content was written by engineers. So we had a lot of coding examples, like in-depth how-tos and tutorials. Like these were very like meaty pieces that someone could walk away feeling like they got an answer to their question. So for us, like we always try to like think about like, if someone hits our page, did they get everything that they needed to be able to answer that question or that search term that they were looking for? But Karl, in your experience, like, what does it mean to create fantastic content?
No, that's a really good answer. It's got to be technically accurate. It's got to be editorially like well written, or at least like understandable. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect in that like it's the most flowing prose like a journalist wrote it, but it definitely needs to make sense. And then the other thing I'll say that's like kind of a counterpoint to some of the like build great content is you also have to be consistently publishing. And some people get in their own way around this. And what I mean here is a lot of times we'll see this with early stage startups. They think every piece on the blog needs to be reviewed by a founder and literally rewritten by them in order for it to be good enough for them. And you're never going to build a publishing cadence that is even once a week, much less 3 a week, like we see with our biggest companies that work with us. They're doing 3 to 5 pieces a week because they've sort of let go of a certain level of control. And their founder, their CEO, doesn't go review blog posts at the end of the day. They just have to trust the team that it's going to be good enough to answer the query and to work. And the other thing too, that the pragmatic side of me with keyword research and that kind of content is, your first time publishing a piece on a keyword does not mean you should leave it there forever and it never gets updated. One of the best ways to get more bang for your buck out of your blog is to go back to anything that was written 1 or 2 years ago that started to drop off in traffic. You can kind of look through Google Analytics and just refresh it. Like, make sure you add some new updated stats, add new code samples, update the libraries, put a new date on it, drop it on the homepage. It's like, most people aren't sitting on your blog like, look, oh, they published this 2 years ago. Like, nobody knows. So just make sure you've got the most current information up there over time. And pieces can get better over time, just like your early stage product does, right? Your first version of your product kind of sucks. Your first version of your blog post might not be the best thing in the world, but it's got to be out there. You've got to learn from it and iterate on it, get better over time. So, don't hold yourself back by thinking every piece has to be the most fantastic ever written.
Yeah, I think going back and updating and improving existing content is how you can drive the most new incremental traffic once you've already developed your blog. And also, like, when someone goes to like a search listings page, like they've got the Google results in front of them, like they don't want to click on an article from 2018. Like, if there's an article right next to it that's from 2023, like I would rather click on the article from 2023, especially if it's like an industry that's changing very frequently. So at a minute, I know like Google has said mixed things on this, but I am a firm believer in updating all of your publishing dates once a year. So just a quick pro tip, like, don't forget to update your publishing dates to 2023 across your content after this call, because it'll increase your click-through rate from search. And then yeah, as far as the next question goes, I'll handle this one. It's about working with like Draft.dev and like what's kind of the best like processes to like work with them and build the pipeline and load up that pipeline for the next few months. And I'll take this from the perspective of not just working with Draft.dev, because we worked with a large number of freelancers too. So the way that we would plan our content, we would go in like monthly or quarterly sprints. So at the start of each quarter, we would plan out our entire editorial calendar, and we would know like, okay, we're going to get this piece of content this week, each week for the entire quarter. We would then once a month go and just make sure that that plan still looked good. And we typically would assign to our freelancers or our agencies their projects with about like a 2-month lead time. So the agency or the freelancer, the agency in this case being Karl, would know like, okay, we're going to deliver these 15 articles to Contain IQ over the next 2 months. So you have to build in some lead time. And then you kind of have to refresh that pipeline to keep up with that lead time as you're creating content, because you don't want to get into a place where you haven't picked any topics for 2 months and then there's lead time and you can't get any content for 2 months. So I would plan on a quarterly basis, and you can definitely do like that keyword research internally and strategy internally, but you can also work with like an agency who might be able to help you with that as well.
Yeah, we do keyword research with about 30% of our clients, and the rest of them do it either in-house or have like, external agencies that do it. I'll say that I think it is helpful when you're doing keyword research to have someone technical at least review the keywords you're coming up with. I had a really specific example the other day. A client was trying to rank for things related to deploying code out to Kubernetes. And so they thought, let's rank for Kubernetes deployment. As a less technical marketing person, didn't realize that a deployment is a thing in Kubernetes. It's not talking about deploying your software to Kubernetes. It's an actual like an item in Kubernetes word, list. So you would write that article a little differently if you know technically what's happening behind the scenes than if you were a marketing person thinking, oh, we should rank for that. So, always be cautious with like any non-technical SEO researchers and agencies, just to make sure that they like do a double check, have them, run things by your engineers to make sure it makes sense. But yeah, we do that too for clients. So, yep.
Yeah, I'm going to tackle a couple of these ones really quick. So I got a question on, should you use a subdomain or put your blog on your primary domain? So for example, should you put it on blog.company.com or company.com/blog? You should 100% put it on company.com/blog and not the subdomain. It's a big mistake I'll see startups make because it's often easier to put your CMS on a subdomain than to integrate it onto the primary domain. But you want to put your blog on the primary domain. And the reason that's important is because if you put it on a subdomain, Google will effectively see these things as two different websites. And so as you build backlinks to your primary domain, you want all of that like page rank, that link equity that it's often referred to pass along to all of the content that's included on your primary domain. So you should, after this call, if you're on a subdomain, move your blog over to the primary domain. That's the best long-term approach. It's going to pass domain authority across your website most effectively, and it's going to help all of that content rank higher than if it was published on a subdomain. The next question I got was, if you're doing keyword research and you see that a keyword's only getting 40 or 50 searches a month, and it's hard to believe, what should we think about that? Yeah, so in developer tools, this is very common.
Yeah.
Essentially where the keyword research tools like ours and tools like Ahrefs get their data from is they're essentially like buying data from the Google Chrome plugins that you have on your browser. So these tools are like watching to see like what you're searching for and how often you're searching it from like a sample of people, and then they bubble up that sample to like the population to make a projection. As I think we know, like developers are probably like the least likely people to have like horoscope plugins, horoscope Chrome plugins on their browsers. And so the data is not going to be as accurate as it would be for an industry like pet care, for example. So in short, like the data just isn't as accurate, and often it's quite a bit lower. So if you're seeing a keyword and it's only saying like it's getting 50 searches, but you're fairly confident that it's getting more searches than that, I think you can take that bet. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a real world example. So if you use like ContaignIQ as like a domain and you plug it into some of the different tools on the internet, which will tell you how much organic search traffic we're getting, they will say that we're getting like 35,000 visitors a month, when in actuality, we were getting 200,000. So we were getting 6 times as much traffic than some of the tools estimated we were. And that's because the tools can't pick up on all of like the longer tail keywords. And also they're projecting less search volume for the keywords than the actual number is. So if you see a keyword that's getting like 50 searches per month, but you're fairly confident, I would say still go for it. It's probably actually getting a lot more searches than the tools say it is.
Yeah, the other thing related to that is, Ahrefs will give you each individual keyword, how much volume does it think there is, and what about the articles that really end up meeting like several small keywords? We've actually had a few clients do this well, where they pick like 3 keywords that are very closely related that all have 10 to 50 searches a month on Ahrefs. Let's build an article that answers all 3 of those keywords in a way. This is really tricky to do because answering 3 keyword queries is not necessarily easy, but in some cases there are related terms that make sense. And you can kind of build a piece of content that in aggregate gets a lot more traffic, even though the volume in each term is pretty low.
Yeah, and there are tools that you can use for this. Like we have one, there are many other tools out there on the market, like content optimization tools. So tools that you can use to optimize your content for like those longer tail or related terms that like you might not think of, but are important to include in your article to get it to rank for a larger number of related keywords and drive an incremental amount of additional traffic. So there are tools you can use to like optimize your existing or current content to rank for an additional number of related terms. So I definitely think that's important to incorporate as you're refreshing previously published articles too. All right, Karl, I'll let you take this one. So where would you fit in DevRel teams? Are they there just for support and possibly writing code and video content? You're going to tell me it depends. Haha.
I know. I hate that that's what I say. No, DevRel is super interesting because it's a new job title and field. And so companies haven't figured out where it's supposed to fit. Some companies put it under marketing. Some companies put it next to marketing and reporting directly to like a C-level, like CEO. Others will put it I've seen it under engineering or product as well. And in fact, in product-led growth companies, it's started to get more tightly aligned with product, because DevRel tends to be creating like documentation and open source libraries and content to support the product's adoption, which is marketing, but also it's like marketing through the product. So it's, I hate that it depends, but it does depend a lot. What we see, our typical points of contact at Draft.dev is it could be a marketing head of content, head of marketing person who is just needs technical content and maybe doesn't have a DevRel team to support them. Their only support is like other engineers or us. And then in other cases, we'll see we work directly with a DevRel team that already has a mandate to go create, 50 pieces of content a month, and they want us to take on 10 or 20 of those. So that's, both of those happen for us. I think that it's important, however your organization structures it, it's important to know who owns content and for everyone to be pulling in the same direction. That's another challenge with this. Happens more in bigger companies, but we work with a few really big companies where their marketing team is writing keyword driven content on keywords that is very fluffy and high level and junky. And then their engineering or DevRel team is actually writing the same like content on the same keywords that's really deep and really interesting and great. And it sucks that they're like basically fighting against each other for these keywords instead of just pushing it all to one team that can do the work really well. So be careful of that kind of thing. That's like my biggest caution is don't cannibalize yourself, as Nate said, and also, know who the audience is and make sure you've got writers who can speak to that audience.
Yeah, 100%. If you've got the engineering team writing content, you've got the marketing team writing content, and they're both going for the same keyword, you're going to run into that cannibalization issue, and neither of those posts are going to perform as well as they could as a result. I'm going to do a quick one and then do a little bit longer one. So a quick one is like, how should you structure your URLs when you're publishing articles on your site? You should make them clean and directly related to the keyword you're going after. So for example, in that earlier slide, I won't go back and show it to you, but we had that example of like how to debug Kubernetes crash loop backoff events tutorial. Like, I don't think you would want to structure your URL as how.to-debug Kubernetes crash loop backoff events tutorial. Like, you want to keep the URLs very short. So in this case, I would just make the URL /Kubernetes crash loop backoffs. Don't add like 5 tips in that URL. Don't add like 2023 in that URL. Keep the URLs like really clean and to the point on that keyword that you want to go after. And then this next one's a little bit longer. So like, how should you be using like GPT created content? I have some strong opinions on this. I might be old school, but I'm a believer in humans and human written content. And Google has changed their stance on this quite a bit in the last year. Like a year ago, Google came out clearly and said, don't use AI to create content. But they updated their stance a couple months ago and they said like, you can use AI, but it has to just be a starting point. Like, they still want you to add your original expertise, your experience to that content. And so I see AI as like a helpful starting point to an article, but I would not, and as Google said, don't just like copy and paste from like ChatGPT onto your website. Like, that might work short term, and I have seen it work short term, but I believe that like the longer term strategy, because this is a long-term strategy, like the best approach is to write content by actual humans who are actual experts in these topics. And so personally, if I was building a site today, I would not use AI to create my content. But I do realize that many people are. And if you are, I would say be careful and not overdo it.
Yeah. Same thought here is, and we've seen writers who use AI written content. So like, we work with a ton of 350 freelance writers. You imagine some of them are submitting some AI written content, right? And we've caught those. Usually how we catch them, we'll either run them through a tool. Nate, Positional is good for that, but without the plug, there's the other way we catch it. Usually we can catch it even without the tool, because it just never hits the level of technical depth and personal experience that we would expect a piece to hit. You can usually tell, and I actually think there's going to be a lot of potential for AI to write some simple kinds of content, like take your documentation and write a how-to guide on top of that. Like, maybe in a really simple case, that'll work without much oversight. But once you start integrating multiple tools together, it gets complicated. Somebody's going to have to be there overseeing the AI for sure. And then once you get into really more complex pieces, like actual good thought leadership pieces, or even like definitional pieces like what is a Kubernetes event, you'll see that the AI writes really good, like first introduction, what is a Kubernetes event, but it struggles to get deeper into the weeds of like what it really means in practice and how it actually gets used and misused, et cetera. And so you really need a human who knows the topic well to at least be there guiding and editing the AI, even if they're sort of like pairing with it. And I think that's what we'll end up with at the end of the day. It's going to be a like your pair programming assistant, your pair writing assistant. Like I could totally see that, but it's not going to be like replacing humans for this deep technical knowledge.
Yeah. And just real quick, we will be sharing a recording, so you guys will all get a copy of that after this. And as far as like how to think about costs, because that was another question we got, like, how do you think about the cost of building this channel? So for me, I don't think about cost on a per article basis, because when you look at a per article basis, it can feel like really expensive. Like, dang, like, is this piece of content worth like that much? But I try to think about cost as a whole. So like, okay, what was the cost for us to create 50 articles, and how much traffic are we driving each month because of it? And are we happy with that? And is that leading to conversions? Are we happy with that? So from a cost perspective, I would think of the cost as, what did it cost me to create this portfolio of content, and not cost on a single article basis? Because I think if you do that, like the math,
right. And as you said, like the problem with that is that content gets exponentially more valuable as you do more of it. So what I often see startups do is they'll say to us like, well, could we just test you guys out with 4 articles, and then we wait 3 months and see how those perform, and then we'll come back if we want more. I'm like, you're not going to get anything from that. Like, I'm going to stop you right there. Like, it's not even worth 4 articles. Like 4 articles won't rank you anywhere that you want to get to. It's not going to get you 10,000 visitors. So to Nate's point earlier, it's like, what would, the way I say is like kind of what Nate did, what would 200,000 visitors per month mean for your company? How much would that be worth in the story you can tell investors, in the actual customers and sales you make? And then let me tell you like reasonably what that cost will be to build you up to that level and how long that'll take. And you tell me if that's worth it or not to you. That's exactly what I would say. And it's yeah, you can't look at the single article price, because it's always going to be more expensive than you want to pay.
Yep. And why shouldn't you write 3,000 or 4,000 word articles? I think if you're doing like a kick-ass like thought leadership piece, then like, yeah, let's write 3,000 words, 4,000 words, if like every word is needed to make this a great article. But from like a keyword perspective, like a ranking well in search perspective, you just don't need to. So you're going to burn a lot of energy. But I think what happens when you tend to write 4,000 word articles is like the directness, it tends to get diluted. So like I mentioned, you're much better off creating like 3 1,500 word articles at 3 very specific keywords than 1 4,000 word article attacking all 3 of those keywords with 1 article. So you want each article to be very direct, at least from an organic search perspective. And typically you just don't need 4,000 words to do that. But if it is more of like a thought leadership piece or another type of content, then maybe you do need 4,000 words. And if that's the case, then go for it.
Yeah, I think longer is not necessarily bad if it's well structured and it actually needs that much to explain the topic. We've written a couple like massive guides on something that was really high level that we wanted to really like cover in depth, right? And I don't think that's always wrong, but to Nate's point, I think what you could do if you're kind of being more pragmatic is you could write, let's say it's like network topography. You could write 4,000 words on network topography and all the ins and outs of it, but you could probably also find 5 or 6 other keywords that deserve their own article within that discussion. And instead of writing all of them into one article, you split those out into their own individual pieces. And now you've got like greater breadth of coverage, but you also have the ability to build internal links. Like it kind of makes more sense to kind of cap your articles somewhere in that 2,000 word range.
Yep. And as far as as far as like the other distribution channels go, like Hacker News, Reddit, things like that, there are a couple questions here. How do you stop people from like downvoting your content? I think you're on the right track with making them non-promotional. And even from like a keyword perspective, like our content's non-promotional. So like 90% of the article would not be about us. So whether you're creating like thought leadership pieces that are designed for Hacker News, or you're creating content designed to rank well on search engines, I would err on the side of making them non-promotional to you. You can inject call to actions here and there, but the bulk of the content should be what's best for that reader, and not your product.
Yes.
And as far as like where to distribute, I think like LinkedIn's great, Reddit's great. You never know what's going to work on channels like Reddit. So I think if you're creating this content already, then you should share it everywhere you can. And like one quick hack that I think like a lot of people could benefit from here, is if there are newsletters in your industry, you should 100% be pitching your content to those newsletters every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, because it will work. So for example, like there's like 15 Kubernetes newsletters out there. And every 2-3 weeks, we would go to them and say like, hey, we just wrote these 4 awesome articles. I think you'll really enjoy them. And they would usually take one and then put it in their newsletter, and it would drive a lot of traffic. We would get a backlink. It was great. So if you are creating this content, definitely think about the newsletters in your industry that you could pitch to get them to include it. That's my favorite distribution channel besides organic search. And the occasional home run on Hacker News or Reddit.
Yeah. I just put our big list. We've got several hundred developer newsletters and a big blog post. So if you search for like Draft.dev newsletters, you'll find it. I put it in the chat for Nate to share out. Yeah, with the other channels. So Hacker News and Reddit, what I find is they're very hit or miss and mostly miss. So just plan on like a 10-to-1 ratio of misses to hits, even if you get pretty good at it. What I've seen clients do that works pretty well is they also inject in a lot of other content that isn't their own. So Hacker News isn't dumb, Reddit's not dumb. If you are only submitting content from your one single domain that you write everything on, like they're not going to know you're just full, you're not really promoting the community. So what you do instead is you cycle through, you get yourself a list of 10 or 20 blogs, and you're like every day or every week or whatever, you're submitting a new article, and every now and then one is yours, or from your site. And yes, you will get downvoted occasionally, and yes, you will get like some negative flack occasionally, but honestly, like the negative stuff, like it's funny when you get downvoted, it becomes less visible. So people complaining about it are less visible than if they upvoted it and then start complaining about it. So it actually doesn't hurt you as much as you think it does. But I know there's like some people have a very personal connection with their content, and they feel it when they get downvoted and told they're wrong or told they're annoying or spammers or whatever. Like you kind of have to get over that. The internet's a tough place and people are anonymous out there. So my personal view is like, put it out there. And if people don't like it, F it. But yeah, that's just me. I'm able to get over things quickly.
Yeah, and we're gonna do like one more question because I know we're already like 7 minutes over, and you all have content to create and publish. So Karl, I'll let you pick like 1 or 2 more, and then we'll wrap it up. And
you guys can always email me to Karl@draft.dev. I'm pretty open. I'm happy to answer questions offline. I'll record you a Loom or set up a little call with you if you want. So let's see. Maybe the only other one that I thought was interesting is community input tools. I haven't found one single tool. Here's what I do with clients when we do community research for them. We go to Stack Overflow and look up all the sort of keywords in their area and see what hot topics are out there. We go to Reddit and see if anything has ever been surfaced to front page or like a front page of a community that is like really relevant to this. And we try to like figure out why that is and look at the discussions around it, see if there's something we could talk about. Same with Hacker News. You can do the same kind of thing. We've also had clients who are parts of niche Slack communities or Discords where they've got tons of questions coming in and they have somebody on the team who's just collecting those questions all the time to see like what's getting asked. That takes a lot of work, but like obviously you're gonna learn a lot. And then there are some tools. So there are some tools, but I've never found them to be working very good for developer focused content because what we do is so niche and the volumes and things can be very low. It also doesn't get shared on like the big public platforms as widely like on Twitter. So a lot of it's just being out there and knowing what's going on. And if you don't, then have a way to poll your team or figure out from your team, the engineers and people involved in content or not in content that are like in the trenches, figure out what they're talking about.
Okay. And maybe one more, Karl. Do you want to take
yeah, I mean, okay. So we already talked the investment, we already talked the GPT. Yeah. Hiring DevRels is really tough. That's a good question. And we get this a lot. We actually started a website last year called Hire DevRels that has just a big job listings for DevRels because we get over 200 writers a month applying to work with Draft.dev, and we take